The message arrived on a Tuesday morning when the Earth was still sleeping under a blanket of stars. Ambassador Kellen Murphy stood in the communication center deep beneath Geneva, watching the alien symbols dance across holographic displays. The translation software worked slowly, converting the strange marks into words that would change everything for humanity. "We invite the species of Earth to join the Galactic Council," the message read in cold, formal language. "Your people have shown sufficient technological development to warrant consideration for membership in our civilized society." Murphy ran his fingers through his gray hair and sighed. He had spent 20 years preparing for this moment, ever since the first alien signals had been detected. Now it was here, and something about the tone of the message made his stomach turn. The words seemed polite on the surface, but underneath lay something else entirely. Dr. Danny Rodriguez arrived at the facility 3 hours later, his coffee still steaming as he reviewed the translation reports. As Earth's chief xenobiologist, he had studied every piece of alien data they had collected over the decades. The patterns in their language suggested a highly structured society with clear hierarchies and rigid rules. "They talk about us like we're children applying to join an adult club," Rodriguez said, pointing to specific phrases in the message. "Look at this part about sufficient technological development and consideration for membership. They're not welcoming us as equals." Admiral Lisa Carter joined them as the sun began to rise over the Alps. She had commanded Earth's first deep space exploration fleets and understood better than most what humanity was truly capable of. The aliens had no idea that human ships had already mapped half the local star cluster, or that human colonies were thriving on worlds the Council had never even discovered. "What do we know about this Council?" Carter asked, settling into a chair and accepting a cup of coffee from Rodriguez. Murphy pulled up the intelligence files they had gathered from intercepted communications and long-range observations. 15 major species, dozens of minor ones. They've been running things in this part of the galaxy for about 3,000 years. Very bureaucratic, very concerned with what they call proper order and civilized behavior. The data painted a picture of a society obsessed with rank and status. The Zephyrians with their crystal bodies held the highest positions, followed by the insectoid Korthek, who controlled most of the military forces. Below them were species like the reptilian Veldans and the gas-breathing Altarians. At the bottom were newer members who spent decades or even centuries trying to prove themselves worthy of advancement. "They want us to come to their central station for formal proceedings," Murphy continued. "A kind of initiation ceremony where they'll explain our place in their grand design." Carter frowned at the star charts showing the Council's territory. "Their space covers maybe a quarter of this galactic arm. They act like they own the whole galaxy, but there are huge areas they've never even explored." Rodriguez pulled up biological profiles of the Council species. Most of them evolved on worlds with very stable climates and abundant resources. They've never had to deal with ice ages or asteroid impacts or any of the challenges that made us tough. Look at their history. They've had maybe a dozen minor conflicts in 3 millennia. Murphy understood what his colleagues were implying. Humanity had crawled up from a world that tried to kill them every few thousand years. They had survived plagues and wars and disasters that would have wiped out most species. They had learned to be flexible, adaptive, and when necessary, absolutely ruthless in their determination to survive. "So what do we tell them?" Carter asked. The 3 humans sat in silence for several minutes, watching the morning light creep across the mountains. Each of them understood that this decision would shape humanity's future for generations to come. "We go," Murphy finally said, "but we go carefully. We learn everything we can about them while showing them as little as possible." "About us," Rodriguez nodded slowly, "the colonies stay hidden. As far as they know, we're still confined to this one star system." Carter smiled grimly. "And our military capabilities remain classified. Let them think we're primitives with basic ships and simple weapons." The response message was crafted over the following week with input from linguists, diplomats, and psychologists. It expressed gratitude for the invitation and humble eagerness to learn from such an advanced civilization. Every word was chosen to reinforce the image of humanity as young and inexperienced, but eager to please. Murphy's ship launched on a cold morning in October, carrying a carefully selected crew of diplomats and scientists. They took one of the older vessels, retrofitted to look even more primitive than it actually was. Hidden in the cargo holds were sophisticated sensors and recording equipment that would document everything about Council technology and society. The journey to the Council's central station took 3 weeks through hyperspace lanes that had been established thousands of years earlier. Murphy spent the time studying cultural files and practicing the formal speeches he would need to deliver. His team prepared for every possible scenario, from friendly welcome to outright hostility. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace near the Council station, Murphy stood on the bridge and stared at what awaited them. The structure was massive beyond imagination, a city-sized construct of metal and crystal that housed millions of beings from across the galaxy. Ships of every conceivable design moved in carefully regulated patterns around it. "Impressive," Carter's voice crackled over the communication system from her ship following behind. "Yes," Murphy replied quietly. "But notice how old everything looks. Their newest ships are using technology we abandoned 50 years ago." The Council's greeting fleet approached with ceremonial precision. The lead ship was a work of art, all flowing curves and bright colors, clearly designed more for show than function. Murphy counted the weapon ports and estimated their capabilities from the energy signatures his hidden sensors detected. "Welcome to civilized space," came the formal transmission from the Council flagship. "We trust your journey was not too difficult for vessels of your current technological level." Murphy smiled as he prepared his response. The condescension in their tone was unmistakable, but they had just given him valuable information about their assumptions. They saw humanity as backward, primitive, probably harmless. It was exactly the impression he had hoped to create. "We are honored by your gracious welcome," he transmitted back, making sure his voice carried just the right note of humble gratitude. "Our simple ship served us well enough for this historic journey." As the human vessels were escorted toward the station, Murphy watched the alien ships around him and began to understand just how completely the Council had underestimated his species. They were about to learn that sometimes the greatest danger comes from those you consider beneath your notice. 3 years had passed since humanity joined the Galactic Council, and the honeymoon period was long over. Captain Jake Harrison stood in the ruins of what had once been the central district of New Hope Colony on Kepler 442b, his boots crunching on broken glass and twisted metal. The air still smelled of smoke and death, even though the attack had happened 2 weeks ago. His sister Emma had been working in the medical center when the pirates struck. She had stayed behind to help evacuate patients while others fled to the emergency shelters. The building had taken a direct hit from the raiders' plasma cannons, and there had been no survivors from the medical wing. Harrison knelt beside a small crater where the children's playground used to be. The colony had been home to nearly 8,000 people, including 600 children. Now the population was down to 5,000, and those who remained were asking hard questions about why the Council had done nothing to protect them. The pirates had been Korthek deserters, using stolen military ships to raid human settlements on the Outer Rim. They had hit 3 colonies in the past month, taking supplies and equipment while killing anyone who resisted. The pattern was always the same. They would strike fast, take what they wanted, and disappear into uncharted space before help could arrive. Ambassador Murphy had filed formal complaints with the Council after each attack, demanding permission for human ships to carry better weapons and patrol their own territory. The response had been bureaucratic indifference wrapped in polite language about proper procedures and maintaining galactic peace. Harrison activated his communicator and connected to Admiral Carter's flagship in orbit. "The damage assessment is complete," he reported, his voice tight with controlled anger. 312 confirmed dead, including 47 children. Infrastructure damage is extensive but repairable. "Any sign of Council response teams?" Carter asked, though they both knew the answer. "Negative. We've been on our own since the attack. The nearest Council patrol is 6 systems away and hasn't moved from its position. Harrison walked through the colony's main street, where scorch marks on the buildings told the story of the attack. The raiders had been methodical, targeting critical infrastructure first to prevent organized resistance. They had knocked out communications, power, and transportation before moving in to loot the supply depots. What made it worse was that the colony had detected the approaching ships hours before the attack began. They had sent desperate messages to the Council requesting immediate assistance, but the bureaucracy had moved at its usual glacial pace. By the time permission had been granted to deploy a response force, the pirates were long gone. Dr. Amy Collins arrived from Luna Base 3 days later, bringing medical supplies and temporary power generators. She found Harrison in the colony's damaged command center, staring at tactical displays that showed the locations of all human settlements in Council space. "We're sitting ducks out here," Harrison said without looking up, "spread across dozens of systems with no way to defend ourselves and no help coming from the Council." Collins pulled up her own data files on a portable terminal. "It's worse than that. I've been analyzing the attack patterns and the Council's response times. They're not incompetent, they're deliberately letting these attacks happen." Harrison finally turned to face her. "What do you mean?" "Look at the numbers. Human colonies have been hit 18 times in the past year. Korthic settlements have been attacked twice, both times with Council fleets arriving within hours. Zephyrian trade routes have never been touched by pirates despite carrying far more valuable cargo." The implications hit Harrison like a physical blow. "They want us to fail," Collins nodded grimly. "Or at least to stay weak and dependent. Every time we request better weapons or permission to patrol our own space, they deny it for security reasons, but they're perfectly happy to let pirates thin out our population and destroy our infrastructure." On Earth, President Helen Morgan read the reports with growing fury. The Council's latest diplomatic note had expressed regret for the loss of life on Kepler 442b, while simultaneously denying humanity's request to establish defensive patrols. Instead, they offered to relocate the remaining colonists to more secure worlds closer to Council space. Morgan understood what that really meant. The new worlds would be barren rocks and systems where the Council could keep close watch on human activities. Any pretense of independence would be abandoned in favor of direct supervision by alien bureaucrats. The breaking point came during the emergency session of the full Council Assembly. Ambassador Murphy stood before representatives of 15 species, surrounded by beings who looked down on humanity as troublesome newcomers who couldn't follow simple rules. "We request permission to arm our merchant vessels with defensive weapons," Murphy said, his voice steady despite the anger burning in his chest. "Our people are dying while we wait for help that never comes." Chancellor Vexstar, a massive Zephyrian whose crystal body reflected the chamber's lights, dismissed the request with a wave of one appendage. "Violence is not the solution to your problems, Ambassador Murphy. Perhaps if your people focused less on aggressive expansion and more on peaceful cooperation, these unfortunate incidents would cease." The Altarian delegate actually laughed, a sound like gas escaping from a pressure valve. "Humans always want to solve everything with weapons. This is exactly why your species requires careful guidance from more mature civilizations." Murphy felt something cold settle in his stomach as he looked around the chamber. These beings weren't just dismissive of human concerns, they were actively hostile to human success. Every request for autonomy was denied. Every attempt to build up colonial defenses was blocked. Every sign of human technological progress was met with new restrictions. "What about the families who died on Kepler 442b?" Murphy asked, abandoning diplomatic protocol. "What about the children who will never grow up because pirates knew they could attack human settlements without consequences?" The Korthic military representative clicked his mandibles in what passed for amusement among his species. "Acceptable losses," he buzzed. "All species must learn their place in the galactic order. Perhaps this tragedy will teach your people the value of Council protection." Murphy stared at the alien for a long moment, memorizing every detail of its insectoid features. When he spoke again, his voice was perfectly calm. "I understand completely." The session ended with humanity's requests denied and new restrictions placed on human expansion. Colonial charters would now require approval from 3 separate council committees, and no new settlements could be established without direct council oversight. Murphy returned to his quarters and composed a message to Earth using codes that no alien cryptographer could break. The message was simple: the mask has fallen. They see us as a threat to be controlled, not partners to be welcomed. Recommend we begin contingency planning immediately. On Luna Base, Dr. Collins received similar coded messages from human agents throughout council space. The pattern was clear: humanity was being systematically weakened and isolated, prepared for either subjugation or elimination. She pulled up the classified files on Project Deep Black, the research program that had been running in secret since before first contact. Human scientists had made breakthroughs in quantum mechanics and dimensional engineering that were decades ahead of anything the Council possessed. The technology existed to move entire populations across impossible distances in mere hours. Collins encrypted her own message to Earth. The tools exist. Await authorization to begin preparations. President Morgan read both messages in her private office. Watching snow fall outside the windows of the White House, 312 humans had died on Kepler 442b, including 47 children. The Council had responded by restricting human rights even further. She opened a secure communication channel to Admiral Carter and typed 4 words: "Authorization granted." Begin preparations. Across human space, a new phase began. On the surface, humanity continued to play the role of grateful junior members of galactic civilization. But in the shadows, plans were being made for something the galaxy had never seen before: the complete and total disappearance of an entire species from council space. The aliens had made a critical error in their assessment of human nature. They had assumed that beings who asked politely for permission could be controlled indefinitely. They had never considered what might happen when those same beings decided to stop asking. The asteroid drifted silently through the void between star systems, just another piece of space debris among billions of others. But hidden deep within its rocky core was the most advanced shipyard humanity had ever built. Commander Rick Bailey floated through the central construction bay, watching teams of engineers assemble vessels that existed in no official records. The Shadow Fleet was growing. Each ship was a masterpiece of human engineering, incorporating technologies that the Galactic Council couldn't even imagine. Quantum drives that could fold space itself, stealth systems that made the vessels invisible to any sensor array, and weapons that could crack planets if necessary. But these ships weren't built for conquest. They were built for something far more ambitious. Bailey activated his COM unit and spoke to the construction chief. "How many vessels are ready for deployment?" 237 completed. "Sir," came the reply. "Another 115 in final assembly. We should have the full fleet ready within 6 months." Bailey nodded and moved on to the next section, where Dr. Amy Collins was overseeing the installation of the quantum drives. The technology was based on principles that human physicists had discovered while studying the wreckage of an ancient alien vessel found drifting in deep space. The Council species had never seen anything like it because they had never looked beyond their comfortable corner of the galaxy. "The dimensional anchors are calibrated and tested," Collins reported. "We can move a ship the size of a colony transport across 300 light-years in less than an hour. The Council's fastest vessels would need 6 months to cover the same distance." The implications were staggering. Humanity could evacuate their entire population from Council space before anyone realized what was happening. But the operation required perfect timing and absolute secrecy. One mistake could expose the entire project and lead to the destruction of human civilization on Earth. President Morgan met with her senior advisors in a conference room buried beneath the Pentagon. The walls were lined with quantum scramblers. That made electronic surveillance impossible, and the participants had all undergone genetic scans to ensure they were actually human. Trust was a luxury they could no longer afford. Status report on Project Exodus. Morgan said without preamble. Admiral Carter activated a holographic display showing human settlements throughout Council space. 732 colonies, research stations, and mining operations. Total population just over 43 million people. We have evacuation protocols in place for every single location. The scale of the operation was breathtaking. Moving 43 million people and all their equipment across interstellar distances would be the largest logistical challenge in human history. Everything had to happen simultaneously to prevent the Council from stopping the evacuation partway. Through General Patricia Hayes, head of military intelligence, provided the next briefing. Our agents have identified all Council surveillance posts and military installations within our operational area. Agent Maria Santos has been feeding them false information about our activities for the past 18 months. Santos was perhaps the most valuable asset in the entire operation. A former Special Forces operative who had volunteered for genetic modification to pass as a Velden, she had spent 3 years working her way up through Council intelligence services. Her reports convinced them that humanity was struggling with internal conflicts and technological failures. "What does the Council think we're doing?" Morgan asked. Hayes smiled coldly. "They believe we're on the verge of civil war." Santos has been providing them with fabricated intelligence about rebellions on the outer colonies and political instability on Earth. They think we're too busy fighting each other to cause them any problems. Dr. Ryan Parker, the xenorchaeologist, who had made some of the most important discoveries about Council history, presented his findings. "We've confirmed the pattern from the ancient databases. 3 previous species have simply vanished from Council space over the past 2 millennia. The official records claim they were relocated to suitable worlds for their development, but there's no trace of them anywhere in known space." The implication was clear. The Council had a history of making troublesome species disappear permanently. Humanity was just the latest group to be marked for elimination, but they would be the first to leave on their own terms. "Timeline?" Morgan asked. Carter consulted her datapad. "We need another 4 months to complete preparations. The quantum drives require precise calibration, and we're still moving supplies to the staging areas. But once we begin, the entire operation will be completed within 72 hours. Meanwhile, Ambassador Murphy continued his performance at the Council station, playing the role of a frustrated diplomat struggling with an increasingly difficult situation back home. He filed reports about human colonies demanding independence, about violent uprisings against Earth's authority, about a species tearing itself apart through internal conflict. The Council ate it up. Chancellor Vextar privately expressed satisfaction that the humans were proving as unstable as he had predicted. The Korthik military was already making plans to occupy human territory once the inevitable collapse occurred, but Murphy's real work happened in the shadows. He had been systematically mapping every aspect of Council operations, identifying weaknesses and blind spots that could be exploited. His hidden sensors had recorded detailed scans of their technology, their military capabilities, and their strategic planning. What he discovered was both reassuring and disturbing. The Council's military was designed for intimidation rather than actual warfare. Their ships were beautiful but fragile, their weapons impressive but inefficient, their tactics based on overwhelming force rather than strategic thinking. They had grown soft during their centuries of unchallenged dominance, but they were also ruthless when they felt threatened. Murphy had uncovered evidence of at least a dozen pacification campaigns where Council forces had utterly destroyed civilizations that refused to submit. The pattern was always the same: diplomatic pressure followed by economic sanctions followed by military annihilation. Humanity was walking a tightrope. If the Council discovered Project Exodus too early, they would destroy Earth and every human colony without hesitation. But if the project succeeded, humanity would be beyond their reach forever. Agent Santos sent her final report from deep within Council Intelligence Headquarters. Military forces are being positioned for what they call Operation Cleanup. They plan to move against human colonies within 6 months, claiming we pose a threat to galactic stability. The elimination order has already been approved by the full council. Morgan read the message in her secure office and felt her blood turn cold. The council wasn't just planning to control humanity, they were planning to exterminate them entirely. Project Exodus wasn't just an escape plan anymore. It was the only thing standing between humanity and genocide. She opened a communication channel to Admiral Carter. "Move up the timeline. How quickly can we be ready?" "Give us 8 weeks," Carter replied without hesitation. "We'll work around the clock to finish preparations." Across human space, the pace of activity accelerated dramatically. The Shadow Fleet worked overtime to complete the remaining vessels. Colonial administrators began quietly preparing their populations for what they were told would be emergency evacuation drills. Supply convoys moved essential equipment to hidden staging areas. Dr. Collins pushed her teams to the breaking point, testing and retesting the quantum drives that would make the exodus possible. The margin for error was essentially zero. If even one ship failed to make the dimensional jump, its passengers would be stranded in council space to face whatever punishment the aliens devised. The countdown had begun. In 8 weeks, humanity would attempt something unprecedented in galactic history: the complete disappearance of an entire civilization from known space. They would leave behind empty worlds and cold stations, vanishing into the dark between galaxies where their former oppressors could never follow. But first, they had to survive the next 8 weeks without being discovered. The Council was watching more closely now, suspicious of human activities despite Santos's misdirection. One mistake, one suspicious anomaly, one intercepted communication could doom them all. The greatest magic trick in history was about to begin, and humanity was betting everything on their ability to perform it flawlessly. The alternative was extinction, and that was not an acceptable outcome for a species that had already survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, and world wars. They had learned long ago that when facing impossible odds, the only reasonable response was to attempt the impossible. The morning of Silent Sunday began like any other day in the galaxy. Traders loaded their cargo holds on distant stations, diplomats attended boring meetings in climate-controlled chambers, and military patrols followed routes they had flown for decades without incident. None of them suspected that within 24 hours, everything would change forever. Ambassador Murphy stood in his private quarters on the council station, watching the sunrise through a viewport that showed the ancient structure's central hub. Around him floated the crystalline spires where the galaxy's most powerful beings lived and worked, believing themselves to be the masters of civilization itself. He had been preparing for this moment for 3 years, but now that it was here, he felt a strange sense of calm. His diplomatic career was about to end in the most spectacular way possible, but he was surprisingly at peace with that fact. Sometimes the greatest service a diplomat could perform was to walk away with dignity and tact. Murphy activated his secure communicator and sent a single word to Admiral Carter: begin. Across the galaxy, the largest coordinated operation in human history began to unfold. On 732 worlds, colony administrators opened sealed orders that had been waiting in classified vaults for months. The instructions were simple and clear: prepare for immediate evacuation. Captain Jake Harrison received his orders while inspecting the rebuilt sections of New Hope Colony. The settlement had recovered from the pirate attack, but the scars remained. Now, those scars would become part of galactic history as evidence of the Council's indifference to human suffering. All personnel report to designated assembly points, Harrison announced over the colony's communication system. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The colonists moved with practiced efficiency. They had conducted evacuation exercises dozens of times over the past months, though most believed they were preparing for another pirate attack. Only the senior administrators knew the real purpose of their training. Admiral Carter commanded the evacuation from her flagship positioned at the edge of human space. Around her, the Shadow Fleet emerged from hiding places scattered throughout the void. The vessels were beautiful and terrible, their hulls incorporating technologies that made them nearly invisible to conventional sensors. Status report, Carter. ordered as her bridge crew monitored hundreds of simultaneous operations. "Colony evacuation proceeding on schedule," reported her operations officer. 87% of personnel have reached assembly points. Transport ships are beginning dimensional jumps to staging areas. The quantum drives performed flawlessly. Ships that had taken months to reach their destinations were loaded with passengers and supplies and transported across impossible distances in mere hours. The technology was so advanced that Council sensors couldn't even detect the energy signatures of the dimensional folds on the Council station. Routine monitoring systems began to register anomalies in human space. Communication. Channels that usually carried constant chatter fell silent. Automated beacons that had transmitted for decades stopped responding. But the changes were subtle at first, easily dismissed as equipment failures or communication glitches. Chancellor Vexstar was in a meeting with the Korthek military commander when the first reports reached his office. His crystal body reflected the chamber's lights as he reviewed data showing widespread communication failures in human territory. "Probably another one of their technological breakdowns," he said dismissively. "Their equipment is primitive and unreliable." The Korthek commander wasn't so sure. "The pattern is too widespread to be random failures. Perhaps we should investigate." But by the time they decided to send reconnaissance ships, it was already too late. The human settlements were emptying faster than Council forces could respond, and the quantum drives left no trail for anyone to follow. Dr. Amy Collins supervised the evacuation of Luna Base, the secret facility where humanity's most advanced research had been conducted. The quantum drives, dimensional anchors, and stealth systems that made the exodus possible had all been developed in laboratories hidden beneath the lunar surface. "Final data purge is complete," reported her chief technician. "All research files have been quantum encrypted and transferred to the fleet archives. The remaining systems will self-destruct once we're clear." Collins took one last look at the laboratories where she had spent years pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. The work done here had given humanity the tools to escape their oppressors, but it also represented the end of an era. They were leaving behind not just worlds, but an entire way of life. Agent Maria Santos was deep in Council Intelligence headquarters when the scope of the human evacuation finally became clear. Her genetic modifications allowed her to pass as a Velden, but maintaining the deception required constant vigilance. Now her mission was nearly complete. She was in the central data core when alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Council intelligence officers rushed to terminals, trying to understand what was happening in human space. Santos used the chaos to plant her final gift, a data virus that would corrupt their surveillance networks for months to come. "All human settlements appear to be abandoning their positions," reported a frantic Zephyrian analyst. "We're detecting massive energy signatures consistent with unknown propulsion systems." Santos allowed herself a small smile as she slipped away from the data core. The Council's arrogance had blinded them to the possibility that their primitive subjects might possess technology superior to their own. Ambassador Murphy made his final appearance before the full Council assembly as reports of the human exodus flooded in from across the galaxy. He stood at the speaker's podium with perfect composure, watching alien faces that displayed shock, confusion, and growing anger. "Ambassador Murphy," Chancellor Vexstar's voice resonated through the chamber like breaking crystal. "Explain what is happening in your space immediately." Murphy straightened his shoulders and looked directly at the massive Zephyrian. "Your Excellency, I want to thank the Council for the opportunity to participate in galactic civilization. It has been an educational experience for all of us." The chamber erupted in confused chatter as the implications of his words became clear. This wasn't a crisis to be managed, it was a farewell speech. "Where are your people going?" demanded the Korthek commander, his mandibles clicking with agitation. Murphy smiled calmly. "Somewhere you'll never find them." He turned and walked toward the chamber's exit, ignoring the shouted questions and demands from dozens of alien voices. His security escort tried to stop him, but Murphy had diplomatic immunity until he formally resigned his position. "The paperwork," for his resignation had been timed to arrive at the Council Secretariat in exactly 30 minutes. Captain Rick Bailey commanded the rear guard, ensuring that no human was left behind in Council space. His ship swept through the abandoned settlements, conducting final scans to confirm that the evacuations were complete. What they found was both satisfying and eerie: empty cities that looked as though their inhabitants had simply stepped outside for a moment and forgotten to return. The quantum encryption systems Collins had installed were working perfectly. Every piece of human technology was shutting down permanently, from computers to environmental systems to the structural supports of buildings themselves. The Council would inherit nothing but empty shells and useless scrap. Kepler 442b evacuation confirmed complete, Bailey reported to Admiral Carter. All personnel and equipment transferred to staging areas, beginning demolition protocols. The colony where Jake Harrison's sister had died was among the last to be abandoned. As the final transport ship lifted off, Harrison triggered the charges. That would destroy the pirate monitoring posts and Council surveillance equipment. The explosions lit up the night sky like fireworks, a final gesture of defiance against those who had failed to protect innocent lives. By the time Council military forces finally responded to the crisis, they found nothing but empty worlds and cold orbital stations. The Korthik battlecruisers that arrived at major human settlements discovered facilities that had been stripped of everything valuable and then abandoned with surgical precision. Chancellor Vextar stood in his private chambers, staring at reports that seemed impossible to believe. An entire species had vanished from known space in less than 72 hours, leaving behind no trace of where they had gone or how they had managed such a feat. How is this possible? He asked his advisors, his crystal body flickering with emotional distress. None of them had an answer. The human evacuation had been executed with a level of coordination and technological sophistication that surpassed anything in Council records. The primitive species they had dismissed as barely civilized had somehow orchestrated the greatest disappearing act in galactic history. The final transmission from human space came from Ambassador Murphy's personal ship as it departed the Council station. The message was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that every species in the galaxy would hear humanity's farewell. To the Galactic Council and all who call this region of space home, Murphy's voice was calm and dignified. Humanity, thanks. You for the lessons you have taught us about power, prejudice, and the true nature of civilization. We wish you well in your future endeavors. 50 years had passed since humanity vanished from known space, and the galaxy had learned to live with the empty worlds they left behind. The abandoned settlements had become monuments to Council arrogance, slowly crumbling ruins that reminded every one of the species that had simply walked away when pushed too far. Chancellor Morden stood in what had once been Ambassador Murphy's office on the Council station, staring at reports that painted a grim picture of galactic civilization. Without human agricultural innovations, food shortages had become common on dozens of worlds. Without human mining operations, critical resources grew scarce and expensive. Trade routes that had relied on human way stations had collapsed, leaving entire sectors isolated from the galactic economy, but those problems seemed trivial compared to what was coming. The deep space monitoring stations had detected them 3 months ago, massive biosigns moving through the void between galaxies, heading directly toward Council space. The Devourers had returned after millennia of dormancy, and this time they were hungry for more than just resources. Dr. Lisa Kane, the Council's chief xenobiologist, activated a holographic display showing the approaching swarm. The creatures were unlike anything in their databases, living ships the size of asteroids, powered by metabolic processes that consumed entire solar systems. They had devoured galaxies before, leaving nothing behind but empty space and cosmic debris. The leading edge of their fleet will reach our outer systems in 6 months, Kane reported to the emergency assembly. Based on their observed capabilities, our current military forces will be inadequate to stop them. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. The Council's military had been designed for intimidation and internal peacekeeping, not For warfare against an enemy that treated planets like snacks, their beautiful ships with their ceremonial weapons would be swept aside like dust before a hurricane. General Sam Brooks, the human military advisor who had been secretly working for the Council for the past decade, watched the alien faces around the conference table. Most showed fear, some displayed anger, but all reflected the same desperate realization. They were about to face extinction. Brooks had been one of the few humans who had chosen to remain in council space when his species departed. He had spent years earning their trust, slowly rising through the military hierarchy, while maintaining contact with his people through channels the aliens never suspected. Now that patience was about to pay off. "There is one option," Brooks said quietly, his words cutting through the panicked discussions. "We could ask humanity for help." The chamber fell silent. Chancellor Morden's crystalline body flickered with emotional distress as he considered the implications. 50 years ago, the Council had driven humanity away through systematic oppression and bureaucratic cruelty. Now they needed those same humans to save them from annihilation. "We don't even know where they went," protested the Altarian delegate. "They vanished completely, leaving no trace of their destination," Brooks smiled slightly. "I know where they are." 3 days later, a single council ship departed for the void between galaxies, carrying a diplomatic team led by Ambassador Claire Roberts. She was one of the few aliens who had treated humans with genuine respect during their time in council space, which made her the only possible choice for this desperate mission. The journey took 2 weeks through hyperspace lanes that extended far beyond the galaxy's edge. Roberts spent the time studying everything known about humanity's departure and the events that had led to it. The picture that emerged was one of systematic persecution followed by the most sophisticated escape. In galactic history, when they finally dropped out of hyperspace in the dark between galaxies, Roberts stared in amazement at what awaited them. New Terra Station hung in the void like a jewel, a massive construct that dwarfed the Council's central hub. Around it moved ships of impossible beauty and obvious power, their hulls incorporating technologies that seemed to bend reality itself. Admiral Susan Drake met the Council delegation in a reception chamber that looked out on the human fleet. The vessels moved in perfect formations, conducting training exercises that demonstrated capabilities beyond anything in Council records. These were not the crude ships that had left 50 years ago. They were works of art and engineering that represented decades of advancement. "Welcome to free space," Drake said with formal politeness. "We received your transmission requesting assistance with the Devourer incursion." Roberts tried to maintain diplomatic composure while processing what she was seeing. The humans had not just survived their exile, they had thrived. Their technology had advanced by centuries, their population had grown, and their military capabilities were beyond anything the Council possessed. "We come seeking help," Roberts said simply. "Our species are facing extinction, and we have nowhere else to turn." Drake gestured toward the viewport where human ships continued their exercises. "You had somewhere to turn 50 years ago. You chose to drive us away instead of working with us." The words stung because they were true. Roberts had read the historical records, had seen the pattern of discrimination and contempt that had poisoned human-council relations. The aliens had treated humanity as a problem to be managed rather than partners to be welcomed. President Kevin Walsh joined the meeting accompanied by advisors who included several humans Roberts recognized from the old days. Dr. Amy Collins had aged gracefully, her hair silver but her eyes still sharp with intelligence. General Patricia Hayes carried herself with the same military bearing, though her uniform bore rank insignia that didn't exist in Council databases. "Your people are facing the Devourers," Walsh said without preamble. "We know about them. We've been preparing for their return since we left Council space." Roberts felt a flicker of hope. "You'll help us?" Walsh smiled grimly. "We'll save your people. Not because you deserve it, but because billions of innocent lives hang in the balance. That's the difference between us and you. We don't punish children for the crimes of their leaders." The human response fleet that emerged from dimensional space was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 2,000 ships of various classes, from sleek destroyers to massive dreadnoughts that could crack moons. They moved through space like ghosts, their stealth systems making them nearly invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. Admiral Drake commanded the fleet from her flagship, watching as the first Devourer scouts entered the galaxy's outer rim. The bioships were massive and alien, their living hulls pulsing with unnatural energies. They had consumed dozens of galaxies over millions of years, and they approached this one with the confidence of apex predators. The human ships struck without warning, their weapons cutting through bioships that had seemed invincible. The Devourer's natural armor, evolved to withstand conventional energy weapons, proved useless against human technology that operated on principles they couldn't understand or adapt to. Captain Jake Harrison, now an admiral in the human fleet, led the assault on the largest Devourer cluster. His ship's quantum torpedoes tore through the enemy formation like paper, each explosion creating dimensional rifts that consumed entire bioships. It was vengeance for his sister and everyone else who had died while the Council did nothing to protect them. The battle lasted 3 days. When it was over, the Devourer swarm was nothing but debris scattered across light years of space. The threat that had terrified the galaxy into panic had been eliminated with surgical precision by humans who had been dismissed as primitives. Half a century earlier, Admiral Drake met with the Council leadership in the ruins of their capital station, which had been damaged during the initial Devourer assault. The alien leaders looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and shame, understanding finally what they had lost when they drove humanity away. "The threat is ended," Drake announced. "Your worlds are safe." Chancellor Morden S. crystal body flickered with complex emotions. "We cannot repay this debt. You saved us after we treated you with nothing but contempt." Drake's expression remained neutral. "Consider it a gift and a lesson." She turned to leave, then paused at the chamber's exit. "The galaxy is larger than you imagined. There are wonders and dangers beyond your current understanding. You ruled a small corner of space and called yourselves masters of civilization. Perhaps it's time to learn some humility." The human fleet departed as suddenly as it had arrived, vanishing into dimensional space and leaving behind only questions. Some Council species sent desperate messages begging humanity to reconsider their exile, promising better treatment and equal status. The responses were polite but firm. Humanity had found its own path and would not be returning. In the years that followed, stories of the human intervention spread throughout the galaxy. Some species spoke of them as myths, as guardian angels who appeared in moments of greatest need. Others remembered them as the ones who had walked away and wondered what might have been. If they had simply shown them respect from the beginning, the empty human settlements gradually became pilgrimage sites, places where aliens came to contemplate the cost of arrogance and the value of dignity. The lesson was clear to those willing to learn it. Strength was not measured by the ability to dominate others, but by the wisdom to know when to help and when to walk away.